Welcome, everyone. It's nice to see so many of you come to enjoy our webinar on the DJI H20N. We're happy to have you here. My name is Greg King, and I'm one of the enterprise account managers here. And we're also fortunate enough to have Ryan Carter, and he's our public safety and inspection specialist.
Thanks for joining us today, guys. We'll be going through the Zenmuse H20N as Greg had talked about. We'll jump right in.
And before we start there, many of you are already customers of ours, but for the ones that aren't, a little bit about Multi-Copter Warehouse. We're an enterprise level distributor for DJI and also Autel Robotics, and also recently FLIR. And we're based out of the Denver area. So we're in a good time zone to work with both coasts. And we have 2 full-time technicians here, enterprise management and the technicians here from 7 a.m. in the morning until 6 p.m. Monday through Friday Mountain Time. So we're here when most people need us. So let's jump right into it, Ryan. This thing has a ton of sensors.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what we see with the H20T, which was released about 2 years ago with the M300, this will have the main wide thermal camera, a zoom, a wide, and a laser rangefinder all built into it. Now, what makes this one different is the fact that it's going to have an additional thermal camera that has an 8 times optical zoom at a focal length of around 196 millimeters. And those wide and zoom cameras are going to be STARLIGHT cameras. So this camera is really intended to be used in low light night conditions where visibility is going to be limited, and you might need something that's going to be able to brighten up your image to get you a clear idea of what's going on the ground. So with that thermal wide camera, it's going to be very similar to what we see with the H20T at around a 53 millimeter focal length, equal to a 2 times optical zoom. And then with that secondary thermal camera being that 8 times optical zoom, it does allow you to digitally zoom between those two. So you will be able to, once you reach that 8 times mark, you're switching from the wide camera to that zoom camera, giving you a very high resolution thermal image rather than digitally zooming in, which is what you would be doing with the H20T. We'll have some footage and some sample imagery to kind of show you what we mean by that, but the amount of pixels in both the STARLIGHT cameras are going to be reduced. Greg's going to kind of go into that a little bit later about why you want that for a low light STARLIGHT camera. But this thing has 4 different sensors plus the laser rangefinder, which will have the same specs as what we see with the H20 and the H20T.
And this is what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk more about the STARLIGHT sensor, and then Ryan will be showing some pictures and some videos that he shot recently. And then we're going to talk about the weatherproof on the H20N. And then we also are going to do a deep dive on the thermal, because that's something that's greatly improved over the H20T in this particular model. And then there's a new feature, split screen, where you can do the visual light and then also the infrared at the same time and zoom in. Let's start off with the sensor. So there's no real magic here with these STARLIGHT sensors. Digital photography, when it first came out, it's always been that if you had a bigger pixel, that then you had more light and you could have a wider dynamic range and be able to go into the shadows more, and in this case, into the darkness. But one of the things that does is that by having a bigger pixel, you're not going to have as many pixels. So this particular camera, even though it's very good in low light and then very good with the thermal, it's not going to be as good in daylight as the H20T. And that's something that we'll show you later. And then the other thing that DJI did is they came out with real state-of-the-art algorithms to be able to get rid of noise. Noise has always been a problem when you go into really deep shadows and try to open things up and lighten them up. You get noise, and they've been using these new algorithms that seem to really be working. So the only light this thing needs is what they say, and we've seen pictures, the light of half a moon. So if you're out in the country where there's no city light and you had half a moon, you'd be able to see people and be able to identify them. So here we have some pictures now that Ryan's going to do a comparison on what we're seeing.
So these are the two different photos taken with the H20T zoom camera and the H20N zoom STARLIGHT camera. And this is of the same scene here from the same distance, same altitude. And what we can see is how it does open it up with that H20N, which we're able to see a little bit more now. It does appear to be grainy. Now these were for one screenshot, so it will be a little bit better than that, but that is something that's gonna show up in the camera of the amount of grain that you'll get. You're not gonna get a crystal clear image in the middle of the night with the H20N, but you're still gonna be able to make out different subjects, different areas of interest that you might need to highlight and maybe use the laser rangefinder to mark those to get units on the ground over there or whatever the case may be. But this is just a good example of what kind of images you should be expecting with each of those cameras. And then this one's going to be from a little bit further range away. We can see that it does kind of the overall brightness with the end is a little bit better than what we see with the T. So we see a little bit more here with our sample videos. So with the H20T, what we do see is when the area is well lit, the image, in our opinion, is going to be much better. I mean, it's yielding a higher resolution image, but when we shift over into the darker areas, is where that camera is going to start to struggle and not be able to pick up pretty much anything whatsoever because of the pixel size built into that H20T zoom camera. So here is our first video with the H20T zoom camera. And this was taken around 11 o'clock at night. Oops.
And we have a red light here, so we're going to fast forward a little bit.
Skip through it here a little bit. But as we can see, and while there's the street lights and everything around, we're still getting a pretty good image here. Now, if we were to pan over into those dark areas, it's not going to lighten itself up whatsoever. What we see here is what we're going to get. So the camera is going to try its best to auto-calibrate and auto-expose itself, but when it doesn't have the light available, like what we're seeing here, it has even enough to pick up the car lights, some of the street lights, so we can see that it's a car, but as it gets into the darker area there, we completely lose it altogether. Now with the H20N, when we're in night mode, what we're going to see here is as we pan the camera around, it's going to automatically adjust based on the amount of light in frame. So we can see there it auto-calibrated. And we're just kind of able to make out our subjects a little bit easier. So as we pan over to the dark area, you can see there how it lightens it up.
And that's part of the new algorithms that they have in there.
So those are some kind of the key differences there, where what we see here with the H20T, even in the cover photo there, those black spots, you're not going to be able to use the zoom camera with. Now the thermal camera, you would be able to pick up all of that. But when we jump into the thermal differences between the H20T and H20N, you'll see also where the advantage is with the H20N at nighttime.
And then when it comes to weatherproof, the H20N, it's similar to the M300 drone. It has an IP44 rating, and what that means is the first number, the first four, means size-wise that yes, you can get dust to go in there, but you can't get like a small bug, you can't get a small screw. That the entire system is sealed pretty tight. And then the second number, the second four, means that you can sit there and splash water on it all the way around for up to 10 minutes without it affecting anything. So it is something that can be out in light rain. Of course, your your cameras are gonna get dirty and wet. But if you are out flying and it gets wet, you're gonna be fine. And then the other really amazing thing is the operating range. from -4 degrees all the way up to 122 degrees. So the payload is a very solid, solid item.
So getting into the thermal here, as we kind of mentioned before, the big difference with this is going to be the fact that it does have that additional thermal camera. So you can zoom up to 32 times digitally. From the two times zoom on the thermal is going to be the full wide camera resolution. So that's going to be your 640 by 512, no crop on that. When we get to the 4 times on the thermal, it is going to be a 2 times crop on the wide thermal camera. So that's where the image will get a little bit more out of focus, if you will, or grainy and not as high resolution. And then when we get to the 8 times, it's going to get a lot sharper, where that fuzziness will go away because it's transitioning to that secondary camera. And so if we look at the payload, on the top left is going to be that wide thermal camera, and then on the bottom right is going to be that telephoto 8 times zoom thermal camera. So once you reach that 8 times mark, it is transitioning over to the second camera, and then it'll be able to do a 3 times zoom on that secondary camera, giving you ultimately a 32 times overall zoom from the main camera. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but we'll kind of break it down a little bit more here in a little bit. Some of the flagship features is the fact that it has isotherm. So if you're not familiar, isotherm is going to allow you to custom set your range of what you're kind of looking for. So if you're searching for people, searching for fire, if you had a specific subject or something that you knew what temperature it was going to be at, you can set that in the controller, so that way it's not giving you a wide range of temperature data, but really being able to highlight exactly what you're looking for. It does have an array of color palettes that you're able to switch through. They have the temperature area measurement and spot area measurement. So the temperature area measurement would allow you to kind of select an area of the screen, and it's going to show you the highest, lowest, or the hottest, coolest, and average temperature in that box that you've selected. The spot temperature measurement is going to be where you're able to tap and get a real-time temperature reading on subjects, different areas, stuff like that. And then you are also able to set the temperature alarm, which if you say anything above 150 degrees, please notify me. It's going to beep at you on the remote to tell you, hey, something in this frame right now is above that temperature alert. So, and it's going to point it out for you. So it makes it easier to get the job done at the end of the day. Now this is kind of a good example of those different focal or zoom focal lengths with that H20N. So the 2 times on the top left there is going to be that wide camera at full resolution. We don't have an image here of the 4 times, but if we did punch it in one more, it's going to be similar resolution to what we see right beneath it with the 16 times, because they're off to the next to the 2 times with the 8 times zoom is going to be the full resolution on the zoom thermal camera. So we'll go from 2 times, 4 times, 8 times, 16, and then 32. And as we can see, at 32 is going to be where it starts to get fuzzy because it's doing a 3 times on the or a 4 times zoom on that secondary camera. Here's another good example of the H20T thermal camera versus the H20N thermal camera. So the H20T at an 8 times thermal zoom, it's getting pretty fuzzy because of the fact that you're already punching in 4 times what the full focal length is giving you. At this point is where you would switch over to the second camera with the H20N. Now the example we have with the H20N is at a 16 times zoom. So that's going to be digitally zooming in 2 times from that secondary zoom thermal camera. But as we can see, it still gives us a much clearer image. We can make out people, we can make out cars, where we can kind of see that there's some cars there off to the left, but we definitely don't see the people, and it's definitely not as clear of what's going on. So I would say the biggest selling point with this H20N is the thermal resolution. Being able to stay further away and maintain such a high resolution thermal shot is pretty amazing. And so some of our different video options are examples here that we took this weekend. We'll start with the H20T, but as we can see here, and we'll go full screen with the, oh, I guess it's not available.
I think you can.
But as we can see with this H20T, as we're zooming in with the 8 times, it's already starting to get fuzzy. Now we can make out that those are people. We can make out, you know, different subjects in that frame, but it's just not going to be as clear as what we'll see when we switch over to the 8 times zoom with the H20N. So right now we're at the 4 times. Now when we jump to the 8 times thermal zoom, we can see that it does raise our resolution there, and we're clearly able to make out people and I thought this was a good example since, you know, with that zoom camera, we weren't really able to see the subject walking through the trees, but it was clear as day with that thermal camera. And with that rangefinder highlighted, we're able to easily mark those points, so on and so forth. So that's really going to be a prime example of the differences with that thermal camera, being that you will be able to maintain a further distance away from the subject and keep that high resolution thermal shot.
And one thing we forgot to mention is if you have any questions, be sure and put them in either the chat box or the question box, and we'll answer those at the end. And then a new feature of the H20N is it's a dual zoom, to where you can have the thermal turned on and you can have the RGB turned on at the same time. And then as you zoom in, so on the left-hand side, maybe you find a heat signature, you can also look on the right-hand side and be able to examine it in closer detail than you could with the thermal. But you'll have the 2 frames be identical, to where you can see it on the left and be able to identify it on the right. And then these are the specs, and we'll have this webinar up on our website to download. But a point here that I think it's important to make is that the H20N it's not replacing anything. That the H20 and the H20T and the H20N all do different things. If you don't need thermal and you don't need the STARLIGHT sensor, then the H20 is the best payload, and it has, you know, the best zoom for doing daylight, and then of course the wide angle and the rangefinder. If you need thermal but you don't need absolutely the highest quality thermal and telephoto, then the H20T is a very versatile unit and gives you the best RGB camera and then gives you a good quality thermal. It's when you need that nighttime, that low light and a better thermal, then that's where the N really shines. But then again, when you do RGB with the N, you're not going to get the same quality, because again, you have bigger pixels, but you don't have as many, so you're losing some resolution. And then the last point here is if you do need the best zoom camera for the day, and you want an absolute really good thermal, and you don't need the low light capability, then you can also on the M300 use the dual gimbal option and be able to put an H20 on there for doing daylight and the rangefinder and wide angle. And then you could put a FLIR, their new TZ20R on here, which we're going to be doing a separate webinar on that. That's a dual thermal camera also. But so you could have the best of both worlds, and actually that combination is less expensive than the H20T. So there's 4 different options there depending on what your needs are.
And this is a good breakdown of kind of the other thermal options that DJI has, including the new M30 series, the M2EA, the Mavic 2 Enterprise Advanced, and then the Matrice 300 RGK with the H20T, which we have been speaking about today, and the H20N. So some key differences here, if we look at the H20T versus H20N, is going to be the fact that you have a 20 megapixel camera with the H20T versus the 4 megapixel with the H20N. And like Greg pointed out earlier, That's due to the pixel size on that. So if you were looking for something that's better during the daytime, then that T is going to yield you a better image because of its overall megapixels. But because of the size of the megapixels with the H20N, you'll yield a better image in those low light situations. Outside of that, you're going to see very similar specs down the line with IP rating, with laser rangefinder, and then also the key difference being the two thermal cameras with the N. Yeah. Anything to add to that?
Just that everything except for the Mavic 2 is compatible with the new Flight Hub 2 that DJI announced that we'll be doing a separate webinar on.
And then some of the quick feature comparisons. Now the real differences with the smart features that it has is that the new H20N will not have the AI spot check. AI spot check is going to be typically used in an inspection setting where you're going to be using waypoints to fly to a certain point, zoom in on a very specific subject or maybe corner of a roof, and it's going to remember that exact frame where you'd be able to automate that. That's not going to be something you can do with the H20N, but you can do with the H20T. And then the one thing that the T offers, that the N offers that the T does not, is going to be the zoom, the simultaneous zoom that Greg had gone over earlier. So outside of that, it is going to have pretty much all of the different smart modes, including the smart track, which would allow you to track a subject while the drone maintains its position. One of the most common ones used. So, and then there is a new DJI Care. Well, they've kind of revamped their DJI Care program now. So the new H20N and the M30 series will be included with the basic. You can always upgrade to the Plus, which will now offer 2 years instead of just the original 1 year. So you will get the same 2 replacements in the 1 year, the 1 replacement for the 2nd year. And then they do also offer now a DJI Care Express. So when you do have the Plus plan, you have an unlimited replacement plan where there will be no deductibles. You can send it in as many times as you want within that coverage period, and you'll be taken care of. With the DJI Care Enterprise Basic, you would typically be sending it in. They would do a assessment on that, get you a quote basically for what it would cost to repair it, and if you did want to decide to use the one of your replacements at that time, you would pay the deductible. But now with the DJI Care Express, you will be able to get it sent straight in where they'll send you the replacement right away. It's just going to get the product back in your hands a lot quicker. So that is something that we were happy to see they had implemented. And now we'll take any questions. If you guys have any, feel free to type in the chat box. It looks like we have one here. Actually, we have a few. How does the H20 compare to the Z30? So the big difference between the Z30 and the H20 is that the Z30 was just a zoom camera. It was a 30 times optical zoom camera. So in terms of overall zoom, the Z30 beat it by a little bit because the H20 only has a 23 times optical zoom. Now you're able to get upwards of what, 250 when you use the digital side of that. So really, I don't think that it's a downgrade at all to go to the H20 because of the fact that it has upwards 23 times optical. When you punch it in digitally, you can get upwards of around 250. And then you have the additional wide camera, you have the laser rangefinder, and it's right around, I think it's $600 more. So personally, I think the H20 is the way to go, especially because of the fact that you have the smart features that's specific to the H20, such as the follow track, the AI spot check, stuff like that, that is not built into the M300, it's built into the H20. But good question. And then price for the H20N?
$12,999, $13,000 with the basic care, and then $14,700 with the plus care, where you have unlimited replacements. Availability, we have our demo units, and we have units coming in, and they look like they're going to be a week to 10 days before they get in and before we'd be able to ship them. that it?
I think.
Well, we must have answered a lot of questions. And we really appreciate you guys joining us today and giving up a little bit of your time. The webinar will be up on our YouTube channel and also up on our website. We do have a lot of other videos on both those places. So please take a look at those, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for your time. Have a good afternoon.